Hi, everyone. This is Ashley Latecki Ellenboss with Sky House Herb School and Apothecary. And today I am so excited because I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Marci Moberg. Hi, Marci.
Hi.
So, we're going to be talking about working with your intuition and working with plants and how these two actually work so well together. And Marci she is a graduate of the year one herbal apprenticeship course from Sky House Herb School. She's been working with plants longer than she has just been in my course, and she has really been working with intuition and accessing information and finding words around information for a very, very long time. So I'm really excited to have her here on my channel today to just share with you all, if you're interested in working with your own intuition and seeing how this can kind of dovetail with your plant studies, how you can do that. And I just heard your bird in the background. Is that your so we may have, it's totally cool. We might just have like a little like or like random words that come in, but it's not us or our alter egos. It's actually a parrot. So
Yes, it's my familiar, one of my familiars.
so so that's always fun. We'll have a third buddy here in the in the space with us. So
Mm.
so Marci, let's start off by talking about intuition. And I know that there's probably a lot of different ways people describe it, but how do you describe intuition?
Yeah, there are a lot of different ways to describe it because in essence we're trying to describe something that is beyond words, like words are limiting, right? But the best way that I usually describe it to people is you can look at it in a couple ways. One, as if it is your inner GPS. So like intuition is the inner GPS that you can use. I always, teach my students learn how to Google yourself first. So the intuition is kind of like that storehouse. And another way to think about it is that intuition is our higher, wider, wiser self, and the guides that speak through that, kind of greater channel of information that's generally usually nonlinear. It's more of a knowing without knowing the full why necessarily. It's often very somatic and body connected. It Intuition speaks a lot of times in images and archetypes, so it's different. It's I am so passionate about it because we have to really look at how we have many different channels in our system of information, and we are pretty good and well schooled and practiced in the rational mind, which is a wonderful tool, but it's not the only part of us. Intuition is really accessing, I feel like, this other half of us that is often left behind in modern society.
Yeah, that's such a I love the way you're describing that. And it is like it's like trying to describe the indescribable and trying to capture something like a little fairy that's just kind of like always trying to elude your grasp. And yeah, I mean, you've been doing this work for a while now and you coach people. I mean, that's your primary work is coaching people in how to access their intuition and really drawing information out from
Mhm.
them by tapping into the body and tapping into the yeah, all of the different ways people hold on to information that they are having a hard time accessing. So can you maybe tell our listeners a little bit about how do you do that? Like how do you do that, maybe with yourself, and how do you do that with clients?
Yeah, hard to describe fully, but I can give some basics. I mean, in essence, um, I like to tell people that intuition is more about listening than thinking, is another way we can think about it. So it's learning how to practice getting into a strong practice of listening versus trying to think through and problem solve. So if you are trying to access your intuition around a decision, around how you feel about something, maybe you're at a fork in the road, it's really not going to come first and foremost from that thinking mind. And a lot of times that's where people go to. They go to just the thinking mind, and then we kind of get lost in spinning, right? So instead, the invitation, I think one of the most powerful ways to do that is meditation, because meditation is a great way to be able to settle the energy in your inner system, really kind of ground down and get into the body, and then open up to that listening place. So one of the first things that I recommend people do is learn how to connect into and to sense their heart space. And while that practice may seem really simple, I actually find that when I invite people to do that, a lot of times that's challenging at first. They may not be in touch with what actual physical sensations are happening there, but that's really what you want to get in touch with. Like, what can you actually feel? What is it warm? Is it cool there? Can you sense if there's like tingling or dullness? Is there numbing? Even if you sense that you can't sense sensation, that's also still information. Maybe that might indicate to you that there's actually a little bit of a block there. And therefore, that's like the first place to start, is cultivating that place. But that's
And
really like the important place, at least to start, is starting with that connection to your heart space. Because that's, you could think of it as like that's where the microphone of intuition lives, or that's where intuition sends text messages, we could say. Yeah.
and why the heart? Why not the big toe? Why not the gut? Why not the throat? Why the heart?
Well, I mean, intuition lives in the whole body. Of course, like when I work with people, I work with all areas of the body. But when we get connected to the intuition in our heart space, it's kind of like that's like the seat, we could say, of our self. And that's we see that a lot in a lot of ancient teachings, that our intuition lives at the heart space. So it's kind of like the gateway, we could say.
Yeah. So how
Yeah.
does that look for you in your practice when you have a question that you're trying to figure out, or you're at a crossroads? How do you tap into that intuitive space inside?
Yeah, I do it in a couple different ways, but generally I start by myself. If I'm looking for a question, I start to kind of draw my attention inside. I get in touch with just the actual physical sensations, what's happening in my body. That helps to collect my energy, which is important because sometimes in a modern world, our energy is kind of dispersed all over the place. So I want to make sure that I feel really grounded in the body, getting in touch with like my feet on the floor, really getting in touch with where my body's sitting. And then from that place, I usually say some kind of like prayer intention, which is really inviting the guidance in. So I'm asking, I'm acknowledging that I have guides. I'm acknowledging my well ancestors. I'm acknowledging the greater powers that are active in life and in nature, whether it's Mother Earth and the sky, the sun, the moon, like these different celestial bodies, different elements in nature. So I usually do kind of like a calling in, I could say, of like my support, and then a calling in of connecting to my wider self. And from there, I might just ask a question, tune into this heart space, ask a question. And it's kind of like, the way I describe it is like as if you're dropping a question into a well, and then you're listening for, or listening to and watching like what's the sound when you drop in and what are the ripples, right? So if I ask the question to my heart and then I move into that listening place and just be curious about what information is coming in. It might be body sensations, it might be images, it might be words, it might be smells, sounds, like using these senses. But we have all these senses on an inner plane as well.
I love that image of dropping a question into a well, because that, there's an unknown element when we ask a question to these deeper parts of ourselves. We don't really know what's going to come back. And so it is this
Mm.
sort of dark, open, deep, deep, deep place. And um, yeah, that's a great image. And I feel like, I did a session with you previously, and, that was something that really stood out to me. I wasn't expecting it. I knew it was going to be deep work. But when you had me tune into my heart, after grounding my feet, and I asked myself, the question that was on my mind, um, I was really quite shocked at the images and the feelings that started coming, kind of radiating out from that. And it's funny because I think you're right. When you ask yourself a question from the rational mind, it turns into this pros and cons list, right? It
Yeah.
turns into this weighing this versus that. And you can always think of more on either side. So it kind of gets you nowhere. But when you ask a question and you just wait for an answer, um, it's a very humbling experience, because you realize it's not something that that the real answer isn't something you can figure out. The real
Yes.
answer is something that's already there, that just you haven't heard yet.
Yes. Exactly. I think that's a very accurate description. It's, we have to be receptive to receive those that kind of wisdom that's humming underneath. I talk about intuition as like, there are many channels, kind of where we think of ourselves as like a radio antenna. There are many channels we can be attuned to in life. And more often than not, we're very attuned to the rational mind, and that rational mind is really, really loud. And it's also sometimes not rational. It's that, people think of it as that people receive the information they that comes into themselves as one channel, but it's not one channel. There are many channels. There's your mind, your ego mind, and what it has to say. There are, the voices of your caretakers when you were younger that you hear as yourself now, that you kind of that infiltrated your consciousness. There are patterns from your past lives that are overlaying there, that are fears that haven't been healed. There are ancestral patterns that are kind of like can keep us held. Those are other things that can be like layered in there. So if you think about, we have like all these layers over top, like it's no wonder that it's hard to hear this central
Mm.
channel that is more connected to the truth, that is more connected to, well, what do you do with these, other channels that are coming in? How do you work with them? How do you get them so that they're not covering your own inner truth and the truth from your guides coming in, but rather are something that you can actually work with? And it usually takes this place of being quiet enough and being willing to listen. And listening is hard because it asks us to step back, right? It kind of asks us to step back, asks us to let go of control. It asks us to not have to analyze what's coming in, just to trust what's coming in and then get curious about it. Because the other thing is that sometimes people will get a message and then they'll boom go straight to the rational mind again. It's like I'll be in session with someone and guiding them, and then the next thing I know, boom, they kind of go back up into their mind and they're kind of rationalizing and thinking and analyzing it. And I'll say to them like, wait, just stay in the body, because when you're in the body, it's easier to be in that listening mode, because intuition speaks in long sentences, takes time. It's a beautiful like unwinding of information that comes. And in order for us to receive that really beautiful, still, like unfolding of information that's quieter than the mind, we have to stay open, and we have to say, kind of, it's like you're staying open until it feels like the final drips of whatever golden information has come in, and you're like, okay, it feels full now. Now let's see what this might mean to me.
Yeah, and that's what you did for me in the session, and because yeah, I mean, I had this image and it was like, "Oh, well this must be related to this thing, that this concept that I'm very familiar with." And you were like, Hold on." And it was actually really helpful because, I mean, I think that's how we justify things that are uncomfortable, is we go to our
Mm,
mind to try to make sense of it. But, and this is why I think it's so nice to have a coach, because left to our own devices, it's number one, it's really hard to surrender when you're on your own. And I think, just having someone that can hold space for you so that you can let go, you feel like someone's got me, so I can really relax, like I'm in a safe, contained space, is so important. And then having someone catch you when you go
mm.
into those familiar patterns of trying to, yeah, overthink things. So, I think that there's this element where we do need a partnering of some kind, and that's also, I think, where the plants can be really helpful, because they are like another energy that can
Mhm.
hold space, as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. We can talk about it as like when you have someone else there witnessing you and guiding you. Um it's we could think about it in kind of neurological perspectives. It's literally like you're extending your nervous system, you're expanding it. And when you have a greater container of safety and you expand the nervous system, then there is greater resilience for where you can go. And then there's also the process of, we're all a little bit too close to our own stuff. I'm a coach and healer, and I have my own coaches and healers, and I've had them for 14 years now. On my whole, every step of my spiritual path, I've had people who have held space for me, and that's essential. even though I do this full time and I have a lot of tools and I can do a lot of my own inner work on my own, there are still places that are blind spots for me. And that's, I think, we're not really, I suppose that's not really valued, right? Because we're so taught to be just very independent and DIY and individual, and so definitely I see the plants similarly, as if they're like this extension of a nervous system, especially because they're so wise and they've been here longer than us, and they often act a lot like spirit guides if we allow them to. They can be like spirit guides and hold this really really wise kind of like elder container that has really been with us and our ancestors for millennia.
Yeah. Can you say more about that? This image of working with someone else extends your nervous system. How do you see that happening with plants when you take them internally? Like, is there also a broadening that happens there?
Yes, I definitely think there's a broadening that's happening there, because I feel like I've never really articulated this to someone else, so I appreciate this question. But for me, I kind of feel like when you take in plants, it's almost like mediumship, and you're merging with their consciousness. And when you and this plant merge your consciousness, then you naturally, the consciousness, the energy field grows wider. And of course, I personally believe that the body follows the energy follows the body, vice versa. And so it does like create this greater container. And I have seen in my own journey, but then also in a lot of my students and my clients, that when we do that, when we kind of allow a well wise energy like a plant to expand our consciousness like that, to expand our energy field, we end up developing, it ends up getting mirrored kind of in our physiology. We have greater resilience somehow on a
Mm,
like a
yeah.
physiological level.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because the plants, they have their own, they like, I think of it kind of like a switchboard. Although,
Mm.
in my lifetime, there were no switchboards for telephones, but we've all seen them in movies where, someone's saying, connecting this little wire to this person and saying, okay, now, all systems clear. You can talk to Mrs. Jones. And I feel like plants are kind of like that, where there's like multiple switchboards, like they're like connecting things that were not connected. And so then communication can happen through different parts of ourselves that maybe wasn't available before.
Mhm.
And one thing that I just think back to was when you would come to me to look for some new plant allies to work with. And do you remember we were sitting in the old apothecary at Sky House in Silver Spring?
Mhm.
And I was so excited because I was like, oh, she's an intuitive, so I can do pulse testing. And so, you had told me your story and what you were wanting to work on, and so I pulled the plants that I felt like were really good matches, and then I would have you just hold the bottle and take your pulse, and you would say to me, oh wow, this one's really like opening up. I can really feel like my lower abdomen, like there's like a release, and I could feel that mirrored in that pulse point for the colon and digestive system. And then another one, I would feel your pulse like quicken, and you would say, oh gosh, this one's like, I'm getting a little anxious. I can feel like it's really activating something. And again, this is just from holding the plant in a bottle. Like, you didn't even take it into your mouth. I didn't put it on your pulse point. um, but to me, it's just the plant, the powers of plants, um, are so they're both like physical, and they're also so subtle, right?
Yes. Yes, 100%. I love that story, because that moment like really infused a memory in me for a long time. And I don't remember if this happened before or after, but I was in another course of yours before we did the apprenticeship. And I remember I connected some dots, because I have the ability to read information on objects and people's bodies and energy fields a lot through my hands. It's something that I discovered many years ago when I was going through Reiki training, but I'd never thought about using that same kind of intuitive channel and connecting the dots that the plants would speak in that way to me. And I remember we had to have nettles, like nettles was a part of our plant diet. And I remember taking the nettles out of the cupboard to make my tea. And once I touched the bag, immediately I started like sweating and I was getting hot. And there was just all of this intense, fiery energy that was coming through me. And I'd put the bag down and then I'd be like, wow, what was that? And then I picked the bag back up and again, and it would start again. And I put the bag down. And I remember I did this like 3 times. And it was that moment that something new clicked in me to say, wow, even just that kind of physical of touching of the plants can, if we're open to and receptive, they can communicate in that way. So there are even some plants that my body doesn't tolerate well internally. And so I work with the plants medicine in that way, where I'll just have the physical plant material matter, and I might work with it more in like a touched way, or meditating with the plant. But those kind of moments for me in your classes and in the apothecary is what connected those dots for me.
Yeah, yeah. And for me too, like, um, what's been so helpful for me, because I don't have that same sort of touch intuition, but for me, it's when I sit and I'm physically with the plants in nature, and I
Hmm.
see them and I see their physical form, and I see the shapes and the just like a field around them a little bit. And what's been so helpful is I would have these senses and feelings about plants, but I wouldn't know if they were like, I feel like this plant is really stimulating, it's really kind of aggressive, it's got this kind of forceful energy, but wow, what does that mean? And so once I started
Hmm.
studying plants and getting a background of their actions and their chemistry, it was like, oh gosh, yeah. And then even, putting astrology on top of that and the astrological rulership of some of the plants, it was like, oh yeah, there's all this information that's encoded in the field of the plant and in the way that it grows, the way that it's shaped. And so that for me, so now when I work with clients, like the plants will literally pop into like my peripheral vision, and I'll just like see Angelica and I'm like, oh, hi, and then I'll like write it on the side of my notes while the client's talking. And I'm like, and sometimes they kind of like go away, and it was like, okay, well that, maybe, and then other times they're like, right there, like it's like that, and then and I have to, sometimes it doesn't make sense to me in the moment, why is that plant showing up, because that's not my first pick. This person really needs tonic, not blood movers. But then
Hmm.
as it goes on, I start to think, oh, no, this plant does these other subtle things. And
Hmm.
this is, part of, oh, yeah, this is definitely, this plant popped in for a good reason. So, yeah, it's fascinating how, um, but it is, I think, going back to what you said about intuition being listening, because if I'm only in my rational brain, then I don't have the space for those images to kind of come in. Um, so yeah, I think that that's such an important piece. Now, for those people who, let's say, they are interested in developing either the touch capacity, is it something that someone can develop, do you think? Like being able to hold a plant and sense it the way that you sense it? Or do you think that's something that's a little bit more inborn?
I think it's a both and. What I find when I teach people intuition is we have a lot of different channels. There's different ways that intuition can speak to us. And I find that people will usually have maybe like a primary or primary and secondary channel. So they'll have like different ways. And then in other cases, sometimes people have, kind of all their channels. So that's really my discovery was that all of my channels are kind of like open, and and so it's been more of a like learning how to weave all of it together. But a lot of times I find that people have more often one channel that's stronger than another. So it might be that they receive images the most, and that's like how intuition speaks to them the most. Or it's almost like they hear, they're walking by a tree, and it's almost like they hear, um, like it may be in their voice, but they hear something come in. So it's like it's so subtle, you could easily miss it because you could think like, oh, it's my thinking mind. But it's something that comes in that you wouldn't have thought of, right? So sometimes it's more of like a verbal kind of coming in that happens. Sometimes it's people actually literally audibly hear something. Sometimes it's smell. Smell is a strong one for me. So sometimes there are certain plants I find that speak to me through smell, when they're calling me. This is like something I was discovering recently, like angelica. Somehow I smell angelica sometimes when I feel like the plant wants to connect to me, because it has like a pretty strong smell that I feel like I could literally smell forever. I don't know why I have this really strong affinity with the smell. Sometimes it's, taste. It's like someone actually putting the plant in their mouth, and through that taste, it can unlock some information for them. Sometimes it's touch. It's really all of the senses can be gateways. And then for some people, it's just also just like pure knowing. It's just kind of like this felt knowing that comes in for them. So really, I think the best way to work with like figuring out what channel is strongest for you is just kind of exploring one, or just kind of sitting down next to a plant, or drinking a tea, or holding a plant in your hand, or taking a flower essence, whatever that is. And then just noticing and kind of going through the senses. What do I hear? What do I see? What do I smell? What do I feel? What do I sense? What do I know? And you might get a sense of that. And I find that it gets stronger with practice. Practice is necessary. That's essential, right? I mean, when I first started learning that I could read things with my hands, it's like, not only is there practice to refine the skill, but there's practice to continue to trust yourself. I actually find that's the biggest obstacle. So often we kind of get in our mind and we kind of discount what's coming in. We may second guess ourselves. And so the greatest practice becomes like, once you find maybe one or two channels, or a couple channels that seem to be more primary for you, then learning how to then continually trust it, even if it doesn't make sense. That's really important.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think you're right. I think we do discount our own our own intuitions so often. And, my husband's told me stories of like, high ballers on Wall Street that are his clients, and like, just people in very high profile positions who use their intuition. Like their intuition says, oh, you got to move these around right now. Like there's like
Hmm.
they get voices, or they also are accessing this, but would they ever tell that to anyone? Like, in their mainstream audience, would they tell their clients, No, they're not going to do that. But so I think it is something that's so pervasive and common among people, but it's just unfortunately not spoken of openly. And so we tend to doubt its validity. And that's why I think association is so important. In my spiritual practice of bhakti yoga, one of the things that's one of the first tenets is surround yourself with spiritually minded people. Like who you
Mhm.
associate with makes a huge difference for your level and quality of consciousness. And so if you are associating with people who are just, having you question that, or not, in some way diminishing your own capacities and your own self-trust, then that's very damaging to that part of ourselves. And so when you were talking about calling in your guides and your well ancestors, I love that too, well ancestors, because there's definitely some unwell ancestors that
Oh
can
my God.
try to talk, right?
Yes. Yeah, everyone has unwell ancestors, and usually those unwell ghostly spirits that like hang out with you at night or disturb your sleep, they're your ancestors.
Oh, that's interesting. What do you do about that? How do we say, all right, it's 3 a.m., lady, you got to go because you keep waking me up at the same time?
Yeah, I mean that's a longer conversation, but I mean it's learning which ones are the well ones, and having them become like really strong allies that you build a strong relationship with. And then psychic protection. I mean, that's the thing too, is once you kind of open your intuitive channels, you really want to develop strong protection practices so that you can develop strong discernment. But the other thing I wanted to say, that I love that you shared that story about the people on Wall Street, because I do believe that the intuition is as natural as breathing. It's just something we've forgotten. And that's kind of why we have to practice it. Our ancestors didn't have to do this thing of like practicing something all the time, because it was just inherently interwoven in how they lived and how they understood the world. But for many of us, where that kind of understanding, that kind of more original and like indigenous connection to land and spirits and the interconnectedness of life, since that's kind of for many of us like gotten broken in the lineage, then we kind of are it's like it's there, it's dormant, but we have to practice because we're reawakening it. It's like for many of us, for many, many, many generations, that's been unplugged. So once we kind of start to plug it back in, it takes practice. But then once the channel is kind of rewoven, then it kind of can take off with itself. Um, yeah, and I find that people often find me are usually really sensitive people who wonder, am I the only one going through this? And then, they find my work and then they think, oh gosh, there's someone else that experiences, people who have transitioned. There's someone else who can experience like, plants, nature, animals, kind of communicating to them in a different way. Like it's very, I think it is much more common. And there are people who are more, those who are really sensitive kind of maybe perhaps notice it more than those who have less sensitivity. And it's not that the people who have less sensitivity don't have intuition. It's just that maybe they're not, you could say, bombarded or saturated with it as much. Um, and, but I mean, and I find it all the time. I mean, there's so many people that have had some kind of encounter that they can't explain, or even just a moment of being in a dangerous situation and knowing that they had to do something different. They don't know where that knowing came from. They don't know how they knew how to get out of a place or to avoid a dangerous moment, but something intervened.
Mm.
Someone intervened. So
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And what you said about the natural surroundings, I think, is such a key piece too, because I think, like you said, our ancestors were a lot more engaged in the natural world. I mean, they were so much more intimately connected to the land, to the cycles of the seasons, to their foods and their medicines. And, this is where I think, yeah, herbal medicine as a practice, like not just as like a mental thing, like I use herbs for my health, but like I am an herbalist because I believe in the power of the plants, and I am a I want to participate in life with the plants where they grow. And so
Mm.
I just kind of thinking out loud, like whenever I'm outside, my intuition and my sense of things is just like so much bigger than when I'm in a enclosed space for a long period of time. So even
Mhm.
just the act of getting outside, I feel like might be something we could suggest to people that want to build their intuition, is spending more time in outdoor places. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really great way to reconnect. It's the number one place I suggest people go when they need replenishment and they need some centering and they feel like lost. Definitely going out more into nature is important. I mean, there's a reason, right, that when people go on like retreats, pretty much always in nature, and that's because that's really our restoration place, and it is the place, like you said, that just creates bigger view. I mean, even if you just think about it, your viewers can't see my room, but it's not different than theirs in the sense that I have a ceiling, right? I have walls and I have a ceiling. So there's like a closing off that's naturally happening here. Whereas when you step outside, you can see the sky, and the sky is endlessly up there. So it naturally creates a greater perspective because we are literally stepping into a greater container. And if we're receptive to it, then our internal container can grow as well.
Yeah, yeah. And if we spend more time in it, we begin to trust it, just like we begin to trust our own intuition, that that
Mhm.
lack of bounds is actually a place that we can surrender into. So yeah, I love that. I love that reminder of the ceiling, especially because you might not realize, like, yeah, how it does block energy off literally and also just sort of metaphorically.
Yeah, definitely. And when we kind of, when we step outside, I find that it's nice because nature, I feel like, is really is a nice accessible way to start receiving intuitive communication. Other elements of the other world, the unseen, the you could say the other beings that exist in life that maybe don't talk in the same way that we do, like ancestors and spirit guides, sometimes that can be a little bit less tangible. But when you step outside and you step into nature, all of nature around us nature around us is communicating with each other. We're the only species that's not communicating back intentionally most of the time, or not even paying attention to the conversation happening, which is so bizarre. So it's not even like, we're unique to step outside and to receive communication. It's rather it's kind of like we're waking up to, oh, there are these conversations happening. There are these interconnections and communications happening. And I'm finally like stepping back into that conversation that's been happening for a long time without me. I feel like so often the plants and the animals all the time are like, I don't know what's going on with the humans.
Poor little deers.
they pretend that no one is communicating with them and they're on their own, but we'll just let them believe that.
Yeah, I will say having two small kids that the children are really open to that. My daughter talks to trees. She'll notice if a patch of grass isn't happy. It's amazing. How their sensory gates are still so open. They haven't been programmed yet to shut off that information. So yeah, it's like for us too, like stepping into that child mind. The childlike mind is such a great way to access that knowing as well.
Yeah, and it's really it's still, it's getting better, but it's still like taboo, right? To go out on a walk and communicate with, to say hello to the squirrel and say hello to the tree, and to have these kind of conversations, or to say like, oh gosh, your leaves are so beautiful. It's considered taboo as adults, but as children we allow it because it's make believe. And it's really unfortunate because anyone who has children or has spent time around children knows that they're really wise, and they, the only reason they turn off those channels is because they encounter adults that say something like, well, this is evil, or this is scary, or this is only fantasy, or stop daydreaming. Or even if they receive messages in a dream, oh, it's just a dream. So then it's just like over time, slowly these channels get closed. So it can be kind of, I think, liberating, a little mischievous feeling, and also like a recovering of many of our inner children when we do decide to kind of go back to that childlike nature and decide to speak to the trees. I mean, I have it and have those communications. I have a tree out, beautiful oak tree in front of me, and I bring her offerings regularly and communicate with her. And even after all these years, I still have this like layers of conditioning I'm still melting away, because when I step outside, there's still something inside of me that still tries to kind of like self-police and say like, oh, what will people think? And I have to every time kind of be like, it's fine.
Yeah.
They can think I'm crazy.
Yeah, because this is real. This is more real than the other
That's
stuff.
right. That's right. Yeah.
So we're coming to the end of our time here. So I was curious to leave our listeners with, is there like a plant that you would suggest that our listeners might want to start with, or is there a way that you would guide them to find a plant?
Well, if they naturally have one that's been coming up for them, like I'm a big believer in synchronicity. So if they're having like these really unusual synchronicities where a name is coming up quite often, or they see the image of a plant, or they're seeing the plant a lot around their home, those could be certain ways to start. Definitely my own journey with the plant that was my first plant that I worked with, which is yarrow, which continues to be like for me like my best plant friend. I have several yarrow plants in my house. They're inside just because it's too cold outside now. But my journey with that was actually once I started working with the plant and I looked post facto, I actually realized that there was a lot of really, really, really early synchronicities with yarrow before I even was like engaging with the plants, including naming, helping to found and name an organization. And the first word in the name was yarrow. Wow. So I find that happens a lot for people. There are these unusual synchronicities. So that's would be my first suggestion, is really looking in your own life and noticing, are there any synchronicity signs? And if you don't see any, then just kind of invite that in, like invite your guides to kind of guide you to the plant that wants to work with you right now. And then just allow your senses, your listening gates to stay open, and then notice, like, is there a plant all of a sudden showing up outside your doorstep? Are you starting is someone who's into, an herbal friend who's speaking about plants, always kind of consistently talking about calendula. Did somebody gift you calendula? But that's what happened with me with yarrow. Someone gifted me a yarrow essence. I kept having all these synchronicities, and I myself was kind of still not convinced I was a plant person. I didn't think I had any gifts in that area at all. So I just felt really shy about the whole thing. And then someone gifted me a yarrow essence, and I decided to go with it, and started taking the flower essence. And it's like, it just opened up so much for me from there.
That's great. I love that. Yeah, that's a really great way for people to find a plant that is kind of already doing some work in them, or to open that listening to find the plant. So for people that want to work with you, Marci, how do folks find you? Do you have a website or email address you would like to share?
Yeah, they can find me online. It's just my first and last name, marcimoberg.com. That if they go there, I have a newsletter that I send out. That's the easiest way to kind of, join my inner circle and get updates. I teach programs, online programs, group courses. I do one-on-one work as well. And then I have a podcast too that they could find also on my website or on any kind of podcast platforms, called Tune In with Marci. So that's the easiest way to find me.
Okay, great. And so that's MarciMoberg.com. Just for
Yeah.
those of you who are listening and have a chance to rewind and write that down. So, well, thank you so much, Marci. It's always a pleasure to see you. And thank you for taking the time to talk with our listeners about plants and about intuition and about some of your work and experiences.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. It's always fun. And just a little plug for people who are ever interested in studying herbs and are wondering if Ashley's herbalism apprenticeship program is wonderful. I mean, it's life-changing. It's awesome. You should absolutely do it.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice of you.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you again, Marci. Give your little bird a scratch for me. And yeah, we'll catch up again sometime soon.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Bye. Thanks everyone for listening. And if you liked this podcast or this video, please click the like button, share it with your friends if you think they might find it interesting, and write in the comments section if there's anything that really spoke to you about what we discussed. If you have your own stories to tell, I love to see these both on the YouTube channel and also where it's posted on Instagram and Facebook. So, be in conversation. I can tag Marci so she can respond as well, so we can also keep the conversation going. All right, everyone. Thanks so much. Have a good day.